God reveals secrets, part 2. And boy, oh boy, does he. The years that we are coming into match up and line up with chapters and verses in the Bible to tell us how this is going to turn out and when this is going to turn out. Let me say that again. Our years are connected with the Bible, the years that we are in and going into. 2025, if you add it together, it's 20 plus 25, you have a 45. If we go to Genesis chapter 45, because we know that God declares the end from the beginning. The book of Genesis is the beginning. That's what Genesis means. It is the very first book of the Bible. And if we go to chapter 45, because 20 plus 25 is 45, we see a pattern that we are going to approach. Joseph, which is a type and shadow of Jesus, and a great deliverance for all his brethren. Joseph reveals himself to all his brethren in chapter 45 and gives them a great deliverance out of the famine. And they go back to the father, which is Jacob. But we go back to our Father in heaven. This is all a mirror, type and shadow of things happening on earth that have a larger spiritual meaning. Like I've said, the New Testament spirit of the Bible is concealed in the Old Testament of the Bible. And the Old Testament is revealed in the spirit of the New Testament. All these stories are showing us the future, and they are earthly things that are playing out that are translated in the spiritual significance. Like I said, the great deliverance, that's a rapture. Joseph is Jesus. They go back to the father, which is Jacob, but symbolic of God the Father. Now going back to 2025, using the last two numbers, just the 25. Go to Romans 11, verse 25. And in Romans 11:25, the Apostle Paul reveals a mystery. And he talks about Israel is blind in part until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. Coincidentally in verse 25. Symbolic of 2025. Remember, there are only 42 months left in the book of Revelation of Great Tribulation. Not 84. Only 42, which is 3.5 years. Also, if you go to the very next verse, then we go on to verses that match up with the years of Israel and their program. The very next verse says, and so all Israel shall be saved, in verse 26, after the church is gone. And we go all the way down to verse 29, which is the second coming of Jesus Christ. And he is giving gifts. Now there is more significance in Romans chapter 11, verse 25. The 11 is symbolic of the Shemitah cycle that we are in. We are in the 11th Shemitah cycle, which is a 7-year cycle. And the 11th one from Israel becoming a kingdom. So in the 11th Shemitah, 25, then we have Rome rising again. Now we go to the year 2029. Naturally, if you add that up, 20 plus 29, you have 49. Now we know that God declares the end from the beginning, so let's go to the book of the beginnings. Genesis chapter 49. And what do we see there? They are all gathered together and given their gifts. 2029. But what about Romans 11:29? God gives his gifts without repentance. Do you see the connection? Okay, I know there are a lot of numbers on this board, so I'm going to try to compartmentalize it and take it one step by one step. Again, we are looking at the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, which means the beginnings, because we know God declares Because we know God declares the end from the beginning. So we're in the end, let's look in the beginning. See if we can see any patterns. And boy, oh boy, do we. So in Genesis chapter 10, I attribute this 10 to 2015. Because it is the 10th Shemitah from Israel becoming a kingdom. The 10th 7-year cycle. So we have Genesis chapter 10 for 2015. And Genesis chapter 10, the nations are divided. Now we go to Genesis chapter 11. There's a one world order. Symbolic of 2022. We see that forming right now. And it is the 11th Shemitah. So we have Genesis chapter 11 landing on the 11th Shemitah and a one world order 2022. Then we go to Genesis chapter 12 and it's all over with. Abraham and God are back together. And it just happens to be the 12th Shemitah from Israel becoming a kingdom 2029. So we see those connections there. Now, let's deal with the number 1320. The number 1320 down here in the Strong's Concordance, giving you the Greek definition for what this number lands on, is didaskalos, meaning teacher and master. This is talking about Jesus. Didaskalos. Now, interestingly enough, if you break the number down, 13 plus 20, you get 33. Jesus Christ was 33 when he ascended to heaven after he died, buried, and rose again. But if you multiply 13 times 20, you get 360. Right here. 360, which is a Hebrew year, which is a full circle. And that is Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 15. What was then is now. What is now shall be. God required these things. Ecclesiastes 1:9 says that things repeat themselves. There's nothing new under the sun. But remember that. The number 1320, master and teacher, is didaskalos, and it's 360. We're going to use that in a second. So that's 1320. Let's deal with the 1320. Remember, Genesis chapter 10 on the 10th Shemitah, 11 Shemitah, 12 Shemitah. Well, if you take 10 plus 11 plus 12, it's 33. Again, symbolic of Jesus. If you multiply it 10 times 11 times 12, it's 1320. 1320. Now, if that's not mind-blowing enough, let's take the years that these are on. 2015, if you multiply it, you get 300. Now we'll use 2022 multiplied, it's 440. 2029 multiplied is 580. Add them up, 300, 440, and 580. 1320 again. Again. For this last 14-year cycle. You cannot tell me that this is by coincidence. It is absolutely mind-boggling what is going on. And remember I said that 13 times 20, when you break it down, is 360. Well, the 1320 is at the end here. What is that? 360, a full circle. A full circle. God declares the end from the beginning. Things repeat themselves. Ecclesiastes 1:9, Ecclesiastes 3:15, 360, a Hebrew year. Also, I believe that the word blood is used 360 times in the King James Bible, if I counted correctly. Now, if that's not enough to show you that we are in the end times and that the Bible is like a matrix-coded pattern, let's do a couple more here. So you break down these numbers. You have 35, 42, and 49, remember? Because 20 plus 15 is 35, 20 plus 22 is 42, 20 plus 29 is 49. Well, if you take these three numbers and you take 35 plus 42, it's 77. Interestingly enough, again, going back to the Shemitah, 7 times 11 is 77. But just coincidence, right? There's no way these are coincidences. 35 plus 42, 77. If You take that 77, you multiply it by 49, you get 3773. 3773. The interesting thing about this number is that the very first verse in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the numeric value of the very first verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, adds up to 2,701. The very first verse, 2701. But that also adds up to 2701 by going 37 times 73. You get 2,701. So we have God showing us that he declares the end with the 3773 from the beginning, which can be translated into 3773. These things were given to me by pure revelation. I have never heard anybody in the world I have never seen anybody in the world show these patterns for this last 14-year segment that we're in until the return of Jesus Christ. Now, one last thing. The book of Genesis, coincidentally, not a coincidence, but has 50 chapters. God declares the end from the beginning, right? 50 is the number for a jubilee. 50 years, a jubilee. Well, 2030, right after 2029, 2030, hence Agenda 2030, 20 plus 30 is 50. Patterns. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but it is the honor of kings to search out a matter. But it's really God. He's just showing me these things. God is more than we can think, and so is the Bible. Also remember that we have a 6,000-year prophecy by God in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3. He talks about his spirit contending with man only 120 years, meaning 120 Jubilee cycles. 50-year cycles, that's 50 times 120, 6,000-year prophecy. And that matches up great because I believe that Adam fell at 30 years old. Because Jesus started raising the dead at 30, he is the second Adam, so he is a pattern. So I believe that is symbolic because Adam fell and spiritually died at 30. So you take 6,000 years, tack on 30 to that, Agenda 2030. Also, we see another type and shadow of a 6,000-year prophecy in the 6 days of creation. Because in 2 Peter 3:8, a day is as 1,000 years with the Lord, and 1,000 years is as a day with the Lord. So 6 days of creation, symbolic of 6,000 years. 6 is the number of man. And the seventh day, which is the day of rest, or the 7,000th year, which is the 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus Christ on earth, would be considered divine completion, because that is what the number 7 represents, divine completion. So just a very quick recap. I believe that the rapture will be in 2025, symbolic of Romans 11:25 and Genesis chapter 45, which is 20 plus 25, where we see a great deliverance, and also in Romans 11:25, we see the fullness of the Gentiles coming in. These patterns that I've shown you are just an example of what the Bible is. It's more than we can imagine. I'm sure there is so much more. And I do know more, but I only have 15 minutes for this video. So thank you guys, and God bless.